All right, everybody. For day 18, we will focus on editing, updating, and deleting. And don't worry, this should only take 4 minutes, tops. I mean, maybe 5 minutes, but definitely no more than that. Maybe 20. Now, if I click on any job listing, right at the bottom, we should have a button to edit the job. Let's do that now. So let's go into that job/show view. And yeah, right down here at the bottom, let's add a little bit of margin top, and then I will use my X button component to link to a page to edit the current job. And it will say something like edit job. Okay, let's switch back to the browser, give it a refresh, and that's what we get. But actually, as I see this, notice there's a little bit of padding. So maybe on our component, oh yeah, ML3, that should not be there. All right, I'm going to command click through to my component/button page. And yeah, let's get rid of that entirely. And actually, while we're here, if I open the sidebar, notice that I made the components folder name capital C. I think that's probably fine, but you might run into situations, maybe on Windows. It's always Windows. I can't help it. But yeah, that said, it's more common to make it lowercase. And yeah, sorry about that. Kind of a muscle memory thing. Okay, anyways, if I now come back to the browser, give it a refresh, there we go. Okay, so where should we be directed when I click on this link? Well, let's go back to our routes file. And yeah, let's start documenting this. So this route displays all jobs. We can often think of this as the index action. All right. This one displays a form to create a job. So I will write create here. All right. This one displays a page to show a job. So let's add show for that. Next, this one stores a new job or persists a new job in the database. So I will call this one store. So now I need one to edit an existing job. So here's what we'll do. I'm going to grab this route right here and I'll put it down at the bottom. And now I'm going to say, listen for a GET request to jobs / the ID of a unique job / edit. And I think that URI ends up being really nice. So this should display a form to edit the job with this ID. Okay. So with that in mind, let's make the view edit. All right, let's switch back to the browser. And it's going to be similar to the create form. So I will duplicate create and call it edit.blade.php. And if we have a look here, we'll change this to edit job. And then I'll expect to have a job object. So I will say edit job and then the title of the job. And then let's get rid of this section right here. And yeah, we'll have a look in the browser. So if I go back to my show view, I can update the href to jobs / the ID of the job / edit. But actually, before I do that, notice how we're now accessing our attributes in two different ways. So here, I'm accessing them as properties, but up here, I'm accessing them as array keys. And that's because this example was created before we switched over to Eloquent. Now, Eloquent doesn't care how you access those attributes. You can use them as array keys or properties. It doesn't matter. You'll get the exact same thing. But of course, you want to be consistent. So with that in mind, I'm going to swap these over. This is what you will typically see in the wild. All right, so let's come back to the browser, give it a refresh. And now if I click edit job, we're brought to a new page to edit this secretary position. But now, of course, I would expect these inputs to be populated with their existing values from the database. So let's do that now. Back to edit.blade. And let's see, here is our input for the title. Here's what I'm going to do. I generally like to put all of these on their own line, like you see here. Yeah, just like that. Okay, so now I'm going to set the value equal to the job's current title. And then if we scroll down, I'll do the same thing here, like so. But this time I'll set the value to the job's salary. And that looks good. So now if I come back and give it a refresh, I can see the existing values from that record in the database table. All right, so now let's point our attention to these buttons here, cancel and save. That's probably fine. And by the way, I can get rid of this little placeholder. But yeah, rather than save, I would rather this be update. Okay, that looks good. So let's start with cancel. What should happen when I click cancel? Well, maybe it just takes you back to the jobs page. So with that in mind, that should be an anchor tag. So a href takes us back to jobs/the ID. And now if I refresh and click cancel, and now it takes us back to the show view. Great. Okay, but let's go back to edit job and handle the update click. Where should this send us? Well, let's go back to our routes file. Now, at this point, you've learned about two different request types. First, we have get. So a get request refers to getting a page, just like you would normally interact with a web page. Next, we have a post request, again, very common for submitting a form that stores some data in the database. Now, as it turns out, these two request types are the only ones that your browser supports natively. However, most common frameworks implicitly understand a few more, and we're going to focus on two of those few more. Those two are patch and delete. So to keep it simple, think of patch as updating a resource. Think of delete as destroying or deleting a resource. So we're going to keep this really simple, and I think you're going to like it because we can reuse the same URI, but then swap out the request type to signal to Laravel what we expect to happen. And I'll show you an example. So let's copy this right here, and I'll bring it right down at the bottom. I'll give this a little comment that we will reach for in the next episode. This one will be update, and I'll paste that in. Okay, so if I want to update a resource, I'm going to use the patch request type. And notice the URI does not change, and that's because it doesn't need to change. Think about it. If we were using a post request, well, then I would need to distinguish between, well, are we storing a new job in the database or are we updating an existing job? So in those cases, we'd have to use kind of an awkward URI like this. However, because I can swap out the request type to patch, now the framework understands what we're doing. We're trying to submit an update to this particular job. That's cool, and I can keep the same URI. And while we're here, I can also handle a delete request. So let's duplicate it, and I'm going to call this destroy. This is the route we will hit to destroy a record in the database. And once again, I'm not going to change the URI. Instead, I will tweak the request type to delete. Yeah, I want to be crystal clear here. There's no point in adding /delete at the end because the delete behavior is explicit in the request type itself. So we're trying to keep as simple URIs as we can possibly manage. All right, so I will clear these out and then we will implement the behavior for both real quick. Now, let's think about what would need to happen in order to update a job, and I will write it out as comments. Well, we'd need to validate the request, and we learned about that in the last episode. Never trust the user, always validate. Next, we would also need to authorize the request, and this is a little bit different. This would be our way of saying, do you, John or Jane Doe, have permission to update this job? So if you created the job yourself, then probably the answer is yes. But if Frank over there created the job, it wouldn't make sense for you to have permission to update his job. But I'm going to put a pin in this just for now. So I will say on hold until we learn a little bit more about authentication in future episodes. Okay, so we will skip over that part. Finally, we will update the job and persist. Okay. Finally, once we're done with this action, we should probably redirect somewhere. Where do we redirect? Why don't we redirect back to the job's specific page so that you can see your changes in effect? All right. And yeah, this is often helpful. I've been doing this for many years, and I will still often write out the sequence of events that need to take place. All right, let's get started. Validate. Well, you know what? I'm going to reach for a bit of duplication by scrolling up, and we can copy a bunch of this. And yeah, if that makes you feel icky and you want to combine that logic, there are options that we will review in the future. But let's keep it simple for now. Next, authorization. That's on hold, so I will leave that comment. Next, update the job. So let's find the job find by the ID. And actually, on this note, if you'd like a little bit of extra credit, as it turns out, you don't have to manually fetch these jobs from the database. You can let the framework do it for you. So if you'd like to learn more about that and get a head start, research Laravel route model binding. All right, back to the show. So now that we've found the job, I'll show you two different ways that we can update this. First up, we could set each property individually. So I could say the title equals request title, and then the salary equals request salary. Finally, I can save it to the database, and that would be fine. And you will often reach for this method. Another option is to leverage job update. And this is very similar to the create method. Pass an array of all of the attributes and their respective values. So that would take the shape of this: request title, and then once again, salary. All right, so this and this are effectively identical. Now, while we're here, though, I want you to consider the possibility that the ID of the job we're trying to update does not exist in the database. Or in other words, what if I manually make a patch request to job/1 million? Well, in that case, think about it. We would find the job with an ID of 1 million that does not exist in the database. So this would return null. Then we would try to call an update method on null, and your application would blow up. Okay? So in situations like this, you can swap out your find method with find or fail. So this says try to find the job with the matching ID. But if you couldn't, abort. Throw a model not found exception that will bubble up, and Laravel, the framework, will then convert it into the appropriate response. So this is often the appropriate way to go. Now I don't have to worry about a situation where job is set to null. That would never happen. All right, very cool. So let's move on to the next step. Persist, we already did that. Finally, redirect to the job page. Return a redirect to jobs/job ID. And we're all done. So I can delete that entirely. And this is your update action. All right, now let's handle the destroy action as well. And this is a little simpler. We would authorize the request, and I'll say on hold once again, delete the job, redirect, and that's it. Okay, so this is on hold. Delete the job. Well, let's find it. So job, find, or fail by ID. Or once again, learn about route model binding, or I'll show you it in a couple episodes. And then finally, let's delete it. So I can say job delete and then redirect. So return, redirect, and where should you be sent after you delete a job? I don't know, maybe let's send you back to that index view that shows all of the jobs. And that has a URI of /jobs. All right, and that'll work. Now, you'll notice here I am storing the response in a variable called job. Of course, if you want to inline these two, you can. So I could just do something like this, and that will do the trick. Cool. So let's switch back to our edit view. And that was a little bit of work to handle the endpoint, but now it should be fairly seamless. I want to make a post request, and more on that in just a second, to jobs/job ID. But yeah, remember earlier in the video where I said browsers only natively support get and post. So you'll notice in my IDE, if I try to set this to patch, I get a squiggly line. Let's have a look. Yep, a wrong attribute value. So the browser won't understand this, but the framework will. So here's how we handle situations like this. I'm going to set it to post, but then I want to send kind of a hint to the framework that what I really mean is a patch request. And Blade has a directive for this. It's called method. So I'm going to set this to patch. And yeah, this is our way of signaling to Laravel that, well, yes, we made a post request because we had to, but we actually want you to treat and route this request as if it were a patch. And yeah, this directive is going to expand to a hidden input that will then be posted to the server, and Laravel will read that hidden input automatically. So now it will detect, you want this to be treated as a patch request. So I will hit this route closure instead. And that's the way it works. All right, so we submit the form. It'll validate the request. It will find the job. It will update the job, and it will redirect back to the show view. Let's give it a shot. Let's change this to, I don't know, administrative secretary. Is that spelled right? Update it. And there we go. We redirect back, and let's just give it a refresh to make sure it worked, and it did. We now have updated the title. Let's tweak this. Maybe an administrative secretary makes $80,000 a year. Update it, and we're all set. If I go back to all jobs, I can see it listed here. Congratulations. Okay, so now the only remaining step is to add a button to delete the job. So maybe we'll handle that within this edit form. What I'm imagining is right down here, a little red link or button that says delete. All right, let's do that now. Let's go back to edit.blade. And let's see, let's scroll down to this section. So this div corresponds to what you see here. So it sounds like I will need two different sections, one for the left side and one for the right side. So what I will have to do, let's clean this up, is once again set flex and item center and gap x6 on this wrapper. And often when I'm using Flexbox, I'm not sure what the actual rules are, but I have found that you can sometimes end up with weird button issues if they are direct children of a Flex container. So I almost always wrap those within divs. Like I said, I'm not sure what the real rule is there, but it's just something I've encountered more than once. So yeah, I still see that there, and that looks good. Next, I will have a button for delete. Come back and refresh, but now it's all the way over there. And that's because on the main container, we have justify end. I'm going to change that to justify between. Come back, refresh, and now it's over here. Cool. So now let's style it. Let's make it red, small, and bold. Yep, but now notice if I line these up, the formatting isn't quite right, or the alignment isn't quite right. So on this one as well, I will set flex and items center, because maybe in the future we will have more than one link there. All right, if that looks good, and yeah, if we use a quick ruler here, it lines up. Okay, but now think about it. This entire page is an edit form, so that's going to make the patch request. But this button is sort of its own form, right? It should make a delete request. So as you may know, you can't put one form within another form. So we'll have to get a little bit tricky. Here's the way I would handle it. At the very end, below our current form, I would create a brand new form. And this will be for my delete. Now, I'm going to set this to method. And again, I have to use post because the browser doesn't understand delete. So with that in mind, I'm going to send that little hint to Laravel that I want you to treat this as a delete request. And also, we've learned a couple episodes ago that we have to provide a token to guarantee that this request is coming from the current site. So I will add the CSRF directive. And if I scroll up, you'll remember we've already done that for this form. Cool. Okay, so now all we need to do here is set the action. And the action would be /jobs/job ID. Once again, we have the exact same URI, but then the request type will determine how Laravel routes this request. Okay. Now, the only remaining step is I want to hide this form, so I will apply a class of hidden, because remember, I don't need to see it. I just want to see the button way up here. But then I want to target that form from the button, and I can do that through a form attribute on the button tag. So this would reference the ID of the form that we want this button to correlate to. So for example, if I gave it the name or ID delete form, then I would need to also apply an ID here. All right, does that make sense? So if you're not familiar with the form attribute, honestly, I wasn't. If you don't have it, it is implicitly set to the closest parent form for that button, and that would be this. But yeah, in situations like this where you actually want a different form to handle that button, if I scroll down, then you can define it. And I can say, no, I don't want the parent form to be associated with you. I want delete form to be associated. All right. So let's think about what happens now. When I click that button, it will submit this form. That form will then make a post request to jobs/NID, but then we send through a signal that we want it to be treated as a delete request. So Laravel will detect that and say, all right, well, let's use that URI, but instead of calling the post request, I will treat it like a delete request. That will then find the job, delete it, and redirect back. Let's see if we got it to work. Come back, delete. All right, and it's gone. Let's also delete nuclear equipment operation technician. Delete, and it works. Yeah, and again, I want to remind you, there is currently no authorization yet. Anyone can delete these jobs or update them, and maybe that's okay for what you're building, but usually it's not. So we will solve and fill in that puzzle piece once we reach the authentication chapter. And that does it. So congratulations. You just completed your first round trip for a resource. And by round trip, I mean show all jobs, show a single job, create a job, store a job, edit a job, update a job, delete a job. I think that's all of them. You did the whole thing. And yeah, this is the essence of CRUD. Create, read, update, and delete. Okay, so in the next episode, we will return to our routes file. I want to show you a whole bunch of things. Some nice to haves, some refactoring ideas, and then we will introduce a whole new concept, which is dedicated controller classes. Please be excited. I'll see you then.